So logistics and warehouse businesses, more often than not, are tenants. So tenants occupying properties like this under standard business commercial leases. And the obligations in those leases upon tenants, the contractual obligations upon them, are to repair, redecorate and reinstate any alterations by the time they vacate, so at lease end or at a break option date. Usually there isn't the time to do any, or certainly all of the works, both because it's a functioning property until the lease expires, and also because landlords tend to formulate and serve the schedule of dilapidations at lease end. Landlords have chartered building surveyors, so like my colleague Gary here, the building surveyor prepares that schedule of dilapidations. It will run into hundreds, often thousands of items, every alleged breach of a covenant to repair, redecorate, reinstate, the proposed fix or remedy of that breach, and a cost for it. And the total of that schedule of dilapidations will also include for loss of rent, a claimed loss of rent, for the period within which they reckon they're going to have to do those works after you've vacated. And that claim will total hundreds of thousands, often millions of pounds. And that is negotiated between the landlord's building surveyor and the tenant normally appoints their own chartered building surveyor, and they'll negotiate down to a settlement sum. Usually that's the end of the story. But there's an underused piece of law that goes back nearly 100 years now, Section 18 of the Landlord and Tenant Act 1927. And that provides a cap, or limits the damages that is payable to a landlord for dilapidations. And that cap is to the lower of the cost of doing all of those remedial works, as negotiated between the opposing building surveyors, or the impact, if any, that those breaches have on the property's value. And the impact on value is usually far less than the lowest negotiated cost of doing all the works. And those are, for examples, that we're going to give and explain during the course of this tour. But in brief, because many items that are claimed for, in terms of remedies, are going to be overridden or snuffed out, to use the technical word, superseded, by works to upgrade, modernise and improve the property. So in summary, the best way of looking at it is, if at the end of lease a tenant has vacated a property in perfect compliance, there's no disrepair, no alterations to reinstate, no redecorations, would it optimise its reletability? Would it be at maximum value in the open market? And what we would say as valuation surveyors, my colleague Neil and I, what we would say is chances are not, because most properties are out of date to some extent, even after a 5-year lease, let alone 10 or 15-year lease. They're out of date in terms of modern open market expectations, and they need some modernisation and upgrade works. So we'll explain that as we go around. I'm Paul Raeburn of Dilap Solutions, my colleague Neil Burridge here, who's also a valuer, and my colleague Gary Greenwood, who's a building surveyor.